Hey folks, welcome back to Sub2 Investor. My name is Hans, and in this episode, I'm going to be breaking down in detail the 10th Sub2 deal that I ever closed. In fact, this one wasn't Sub2. This one was seller financing, but I'm counting it as number 10 in my real Sub2 deal breakdown playlist, where I am breaking down actual seller financing and Sub2 deals I've closed and which we hold to this day. But it's a cool deal to talk about because it is a multifamily. It's a duplex house. We did not sell it traditionally like on a lease and option or to an owner-occupant buyer, but actually to an investor. So this particular deal has a lot to learn from. Now you're going to want to stay tuned to the end of this video because I'm going to show you photos of this property, but even cooler than that, I'm going to show you the actual promissory note and deed of trust that we wrote up with the seller ourselves. And you can do this too. So stay tuned to see a copy of that. So first, let's talk about where this deal came from. This deal came from a wholesale referral. So this was a wholesaler, somebody who I had already done business with, and they said, Hans, I have too much on my plate. If you can do something with this deal, go ahead and take it. And so the wholesaler got me on the phone with the seller. Now the seller was a landlord, a somewhat experienced and retired landlord with multiple properties. This particular property was a duplex in a good part of town. But for some reason, this seller wanted to offload this particular rental property. One of the units just became vacant and the other unit was being still rented out by a long-term tenant. And for one reason or another, the seller just didn't want to have to deal with that tenant. So we went over to the property. I walked the property, basically knew that I wanted to buy that duplex on the spot. It just depended on the terms that the seller would be willing to structure with me, the end buyer. This wholesaler had already broached the topic of seller financing and knew that the seller was interested. So it really came down to what I was able to do and negotiate with the seller directly. So we basically proposed, hey, we can buy this property. We'd love to take it off your hands. It wasn't in terrible shape. I mean, it wasn't in pristine condition either, but my exit strategy was likely to either just rent out that other unit and cash flow it for a time and hold on to the property because it wasn't an appreciating area, or if that didn't work out and we got an offer we couldn't refuse, then just sell it on seller financing to another investor and stay in the middle between the seller and then my end buyer and make a little bit of cash flow. So what we proposed was $5,000 down payment on this house. The purchase price total was $110,000. Now I think we had gotten the seller to reveal what their number was, being around $100,000. So we were able to only bring approximately 5% down. However, he wanted a little bit higher of a sales price, so we bumped it up a little bit, and then we wanted a 10-year term, at least 10 years for the seller to carry that note for, but he only wanted to go 5. We negotiated at 7, and we would bump up the purchase price even more to 110, so $110,000. $5,000 down payments, a 7-year balloon. So after 7 years, we'd have to pay off the remaining balance on that loan, and then a 5% interest rate, which was an interest rate where we could cash flow the property as a rental. However, we could also arbitrage that rate and bump it up a little bit if we decided to sell it to an end buyer investor. Let me show you photos of the property while I tell you a little bit more about the deal. All right, so here is the property. Here are some interior photos of that vacant rental unit. Both units were 2-bedroom, 1 bath. As you can see, really not in terrible condition. Certainly not in a condition that was going to fetch the highest rental rates, but it was in a pretty good condition. Like, those hardwood floors don't really need to be refinished to put another tenant in there. The systems were okay. That water heater was about midlife. Washer and dryer connection in the basement. They had done a plumbing stack repair, updated electrical panel, and the HVAC unit was just okay. Bathroom in decent shape, nothing to write home about. And one of the AC units was really old and one of them was a little bit newer. The outside of the house really kind of needed to be painted. We ended up doing none of this work, and I don't regret a moment of that. So there's the outside of the property. 1 unit on the left, 1 unit on the right. Electrical service was fine. And that porcelain sink, yeah, not really the best thing there. Really needed a kitchen remodel, which is why this property, we got it on a discount. Now, these are photos in the other occupied unit. We actually went in and talked with the tenant. Now, those hardwood floors are certainly in need of a refinish with all those pet stains and that old stove and kitchen cabinets. So this property definitely needed a rehab. I mean, there's no way to avoid that. So that's why we were able to get the price at a pretty decent discount, because that as-is value of that property probably wasn't very much higher than that. I think we got a little bit of a discount already as it was, just because the seller was so motivated, and even though we got it on terms, we still got a little bit of a haircut on the price, like maybe 10 or 15, maybe 20%. But that was nice because that created a little bit of an equity situation for us. And so what we ended up doing, we rented this property to the tenant for the time during which we held this property, and we were getting ready to list the property to rent out the other unit. However, I was marketing this property, both for rent and then also for sale on seller financing to investors. And we happened to get somebody who was really interested in buying this property. This was a local landlord looking to expand their rental portfolio. And when they saw seller financing, no banks required, they hopped on the opportunity, they got a hold of me, and we began to discuss terms. Now, in the back of my mind, I've gotten investor loans before, like commercial loans to buy real estate as an investment property. And so I was familiar with what those loans look like. Usually lenders are looking for 25-30% down payments, and then the interest rate was often variable, or it was a balloon, like a 3 or 5 year balloon. Now, DSCR loans were coming out and were somewhat new, but not everybody knew about DSCR loans. But I knew that if we priced this property right, meaning I wasn't going to get greedy over my interest rate or my down payment. Obviously, I needed the deal to be a good one for me, but I didn't need to make it a grand slam. I knew that if I priced this property right, I'd be able to get close to a 25 or a 30% down payment from a local landlord. And even if that meant having to sacrifice the interest rate a little bit, what was more important to me at this point of time in my investing career was cash now. And so since we were in need of some cash now, that's the direction we went. So let me tell you a little bit about how we sold this property on seller financing. Now, we sold this one on a contract for deed, which is pretty common here in the state of Missouri. However, some states are going to be different and may not allow a contract for deed, which is also called bond for deed or land contract. I won't get into all the reasons why you might prefer a land contract over a wrap note, but that's just what we did in this circumstance. So we marked the price of this property up from $110, which was our sales price, to $145. Maybe it was worth about $130, $135, but we marked it up to $145 because we were offering seller financing, and we just put it out there, and it seemed like a reasonable price. You should be able to hit at least the 1% rule in terms of rents coming in, if not better than that, and this was like an A-class type area. And what we ended up getting for a down payment was 20%. We had numerous people walk the property, and I think most people were pretty interested, but knew that the property needed some work, and so coming in with 30% down just wasn't viable for a lot of people. But we had one individual really interested in the property come in with 20% down, which was $29,000 for a down payment to buy this property on seller financing. Just to step back here, essentially what we did was we wrapped the underlying seller financing note in a new seller financing note, a contract for deed in this case. We collected the $29,000 down payment. We charged the seller a 6.4 interest rate, which is very low for seller financing. And we put a 6-year balloon because remember, we had gotten a 7-year balloon from our seller finance seller. So we needed to repay him by the end of year 7. And so putting a 6-year balloon on ours gave us enough time that if for some reason our end buyer wasn't able to pay us out and refinance at the end of 6 years, well, then we had 12 months to figure something out so that we could pay off our underlying debt with the seller financer. What this ended up meaning for us was that we made $17,000 in terms of the front end profit. Since we were out of pocket up front, $5,000 for the down payment, and then we paid the wholesaler $5,000 as well, so that's $10,000 total. We had about $1,000 of closing costs, and I'd say another $1,000 of holding fees. So that is $12,000 as our all-in cash out-of-pocket expense. When we collected the $29,000 from our end buyer, that created a spread of 29 minus 12 for $17,000 net front-end profit. Now, sometimes you get these sub-2 deals or seller financing deals, and it just makes more sense during your stage of life and stage of your business to just get the money and run. Usually what that means is wholesaling or novating a creative contract over to a new end buyer. But in this case, we did actually close on the property. We just decided to stay in the middle between the seller and then our end buyer. But what we did was we sacrificed a higher interest rate for more of a down payment, because we really could have asked for, let's just say $15,000 down, but you were going to have to pay a 7.5% rate or closer to an 8 or a 9% rate, which I just know that landlords, they like the cash flow. And so I just knew that would be a tougher sell. And so my thought on this deal was, let's try and make a little bit of money on it, but let's not get greedy. Let's make it a good deal for an end buyer landlord with a decent interest rate so that they could actually operate the property and make cash flow on this deal for them. So we made $17,000 up front in net cash. And this deal only cash flows us a little over $200 a month. It's really not that much. It's far less than what our average seller financing and lease and option type deals cash flow us, which is more in the range of $450 to $500. But hey, a little over $200 a month, it just adds up over time. And if this end buyer keeps the property for that full 6 years, well, then that's about $12,000 in total cash flow throughout the duration of this entire deal. So we have $17,000 up front, $12,000 in potential cash flow over 6 years. And finally, we have a $13,000 back end spread. What that is the difference between what we owe the seller and what our end buyer owes us. If he were to sell right now, I think the back end spread would be like $12,000. But because we're ahead in the amortization schedule, if he takes it to 6 years, then we'd actually have a $13,000 back end spread. And the way those back end spreads work out throughout the course of the amortization tables is really interesting, and you really have to look at that carefully when you're calculating the numbers. But in this instance, it would be a $13,000 back end spread at the end of year 6 when our end buyer refinances, comes to us, we pay off our underlying debt, and boom, we walk away from the title company with $13,000 more dollars. So what this deal ends up totaling for us in terms of total profit after all is said and done is potentially $42,000. Now, I know that is not as big of a number as these single family houses where we go out and we do lease and options or seller financing on the back end, but just keep in mind, we're making lemonade out of lemons here, guys. This is a duplex where the seller was motivated, but he wasn't willing to walk away at a low enough cash price to make it a good cash wholesale deal. So we were able to come in with a creative solution so that the seller was satisfied and we were able to make way more than we would with it as a rental property if we were just to rent it out and slowly cash flow over time. Because this is where we're at in our business model, it just made sense to go ahead and just turn it around and sell it to an investor end buyer. All right, now let's head on over to the actual promissory note and deed of trust that we crafted with our seller. Sometimes I get questions about what this looks like, and for folks who haven't done a seller carryback, seller financing transaction, sometimes there's a lot of mystery around what that actually looks like, and so let's demystify it right here. What it is a note, a promissory note. Now, this does not get filed. but the deed of trust will get filed. The terms of the loan are set forth on this promissory note. It's way simpler than most people think it is. For value received on such and such a date, herein known as the effective date, then our company is right here with a mailing address of yada, 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 and we are the borrowers. Now, the borrowers, which is our LLC, promises to pay to the order of, would go the name of the seller right here with their mailing address, known as the lender. The seller is referred to as the lender in this document, since they're the one seller financing the property, collectively known as the parties, the principal sum of $105,000 in US dollars. So coming down here to the agreed upon terms, borrower will pay lender a down payment of $5,000 upon the execution of this promissory note. All this stuff, guys, is just written out in plain English. There's really no mystery to it. Borrower shall pay principal and interest in the amount of $563 on a monthly basis, with any remaining balance payable on the due date, with interest at the rate of 5% per annum, due by the 5th of each month, beginning on such and such a date. The loan will be amortized over 30 years, and both parties agree upon the amortization schedule as laid out in Exhibit A. I always like to make sure that the amortization schedule or table is very clearly communicated in the paperwork so that there's no confusion on what that looks like. The full balance of this promissory note, including all accrued interest and late fees, is due and payable on the 1st of July 2029, herein known as the due date. That is the balloon. Essentially, we go from the beginning of the note to the end of the note. That's 7 years. And so we put the end date of this loan just really clearly as the 1st of July 2029. Here's the amortization schedule with the principal and interest breakdown. It's 5%. Here's the down payment. And it's $105,000 being borrowed by yours truly. So that is really the gist of the promissory note. I mean, you can read through the rest of this thing. I do provide templates for notes and deeds of trust in my coaching program. However, often it's just way easier and safer to do this at a title company and just pay for the note and the deed of trust. Since this was our first one, we really wanted to know the paperwork inside and out. And so we filled it out. We had the seller put it past their attorneys and they said it was fine. Now let me show you the deed of trust. Okay, as you can see, this deed of trust was actually recorded. That's what this thing is at the upper right-hand corner of the document. And here at the top, it says First Deed of Trust and Security Agreement. Guys, this is what some people call a mortgage in deed of trust states. Now, this is a much more boring document because it's pretty much just a canned template. What this does is it names the borrower, the lender, and then there's a trustee whose job it is to foreclose on the borrower in the event of a default or breach of agreement. So you can see that the parties, the lenders are named here, and there's a trustee, and then you have a legal description of the property, and you have reference to the promissory note that was signed, although wasn't recorded. And then you can see that the borrower's covenant and agreement with lenders as follows. So this is like an agreement between the borrower and the lender. Borrowers are going to pay on time. They're going to discharge any mechanics liens or juniors liens against the property when the note becomes due and payable. Guys, this is all the reasons that the lender can foreclose on the borrower. This is very typical stuff. And our deed of trust here is actually quite abbreviated. If you ever take a look at an actual lender, a Bank of America or Wells Fargo, what their deed of trusts look like, or some DSCR, lenders are insane. So I'm not going to go through the whole deed of trust, but I just want to show you it's half a dozen pages. The other reason I wanted to do it myself was I did want to eliminate any due on sale clause in there, and I did want to include some sort of cross collateralization of the loan in case we ended up paying this property off sooner than the end of 7 years. But again, if you're doing this for the first time and you don't have the paperwork, then just pay for it. Usually a title company or attorney's office is going to be able to draft one up for you for $400 or $500, the note and the deed of trust. But again, keep in mind that if you plan to wrap the deal, you don't want a due on sale clause in there. And you also want the ability to cross collateralize the the loan in the event that you sell that property and want to apply that loan to another property, which is a cool thing that can be done and is just one more reason why seller financing is amazing. So I hope that was an interesting episode for you and you could see how to do these creative finance deals a different kind of way. And I hope that taking a glance at that note and deed of trust was kind of helpful to you just to see that these things are real. You can do these things yourselves. If you like this content, please like the video, leave me a comment. Let me know what you would like me to talk about in the future. So I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay creative. Peace.